ladies and gentlemen, we are 6 months into the second variation of the Trump administration. I thought it would be a fun idea to do a little sit-down grade of Donald Trump's first 6 months in office. I would say the overall grade has to be incomplete. There's still so much unknown, still so much in the pipeline, as I like to say, when it comes to the administration. Certainly the recent stuff I'll touch on with Epstein. I think that in terms of like policy and issue would be more so miscellaneous. Maybe you could factor it into transparency, a lack of it. And down the line in terms of, yes, a campaign promise that was potentially broken or at least botched. But in terms of just the top issues, I'm going to go down the line: immigration, economy. Sometimes people put economy and inflation in separate terms. It's the same thing, economy, inflation. And then you've also got the foreign affairs, the three major conflicts that have happened or are happening right now. And then we also do have some other stuff, miscellaneous, the Epstein stuff, the declassifications, the cabinet members, all of that. So we're just going to begin first with immigration. And I guess I'll give a subgrade for each section, and then I'll give a final grade for Trump. And I really haven't given my grades. I'm just making this up on the fly. So when it comes to immigration, I mean, I've thought about this a little bit, at least, you would hope. When it comes to immigration, I would say Trump gets an A. I understand the criticism of the deportations being where they're at. Right now, the deportation numbers are not really publicly shared. The administration did share numbers right when the deportation operation started. Really, January 20th, the inauguration day, they would say we've deported 1,200 this day, 1,300 next day. They stopped sharing them. The deportations were way down. It was in the low hundreds, and it was at the point to where they were looking at only deporting, at least on average, around 170, 180K per year. There's a bigger problem with deportations in general that is really not Trump's fault because of the amount of illegals in this country. People say anywhere from 20 million to 50 million. The liberal numbers will say 17 to 22 million at least. And so there's a bigger issue in terms of what we're trying to do, to where, I mean, this is a Herculean effort. We've secured around $175 billion in ICE funding. To me, that's a mandate. I mean, to be able to secure that much just for ICE and enforcement, customs, and border security, and what they've done now with the border, to where they're taking large swaths, large zones of the border, and they're making it's basically like a demilitarized zone to where nobody can step in that area. They get arrested if you do. They've got, and this is why Trump would get an A+ if you're just grading in terms of border enforcement, is because of the border encounters, 95% down. So you've got Harris, you've got Biden, whatever their border situation was. I mean, they were trying to quell it towards the end. It didn't really work. Trump comes in, it's eliminated. There's no illegal immigration. It's an amazing thing. And so for the enforcement and the prevention of the immigration, the illegal immigration into the country, Trump will get an A+. The deportations, they're lacking. They need to up the infrastructure. They need to up the investment. And you could say even that should get an A+ because of the amount of investment they're putting into it through the big, beautiful bill. But I would say right now, let's give it an A. There's a bigger problem with immigration in general, just in terms of the fact that under Biden, you could say even the liberal numbers, at least 10 million illegals came in under Biden. So that's 2.5 million per year. We have this crazy budget. We have a budget just for the immigration and deporting people that is significantly higher than many big countries' defense budget. And we're only looking at getting around 1 million people out per year. Now, that doesn't include, and this is another big component of it, the self-deportations. The self-deportations should be maybe around 700 or 800K is the numbers that I've heard. I would expect them to dissipate, though. They're not going to continue at the current rates, because if you're going to self-deport, you're going to self-deport. You're not going to get a ton of people self-deporting every single month. There'll likely be a massive swath self-deporting, at the beginning of the administration, because they cracked down on it. And you also have the program that they're trying to where they're potentially going to give $1,000 for people to self-deport. If you think that's bad, they've done the numbers on the infrastructure, the total cost, the transportation, the so-called due process, which illegals don't get because they're not legal citizens. Everyone has a right to a process because they're human, but there are different variants of it on whether or not you're a citizen. That's why Obama was able to deport so many people. But those Obama's deportation numbers were also wrong because they counted border encounters as deportations, just when people bring that up against Trump. But the point of it is see, you lose your train of thought, you go into 50 different things. I mean, I give it an A. I'd say it's an A+ if we get higher deportations. It is what it is. It's just, to me, it's so hard because we've got this crazy high budget of 1 million deportations per year. It's remarkable that they were able to secure this budget, and they're able to because of how crazy the deportation, the immigration, the illegal immigration got under Biden. And we would like a total pause on all immigration, but Trump's not going to do that. And I think it would be honestly well within the Republicans' right to demand that because of the amount of illegals already in the country, because of the amount of immigrants we've taken into this country within the last 50 years on top of the illegals. So I think it would be right for Trump to do that, but he hasn't done that, and I don't think he's going to do that. And it's an issue to where the frustrating thing is we allow 2.5 million, and this is a low number, of illegals into the country under Biden every year, and then we're barely able to deport 1 million with this crazy budget. So it's like, well, you're probably going to need Vance to win and serve for 8 years to really make a dent into the illegal immigration. The good thing is when it comes to the immigration, you're getting a lot of the real bad criminals. It's like, well, just deport the criminals. Well, they're all criminals because they enter the country illegally, and even the ones that work, it's a problem because it undercuts and it lowers wages for American citizens. And you can say, well, Americans won't do that. Well, that then requires innovation. And you could say, well, this is a little bit of a negative in terms of the deportation situation is the amnesty. I think people maybe overdid it a little bit on the amnesty. I mean, this is the problem with just the raw numbers. If you give, and it's not even amnesty, it's a work program. You could say it's the same thing. They're trying to dress it up to make it seem like it's not amnesty. I knew they would call it a work program. But what do you give, a work program to 100K of them that are working in hospitality and farm? There's so many illegals anyways. Is that going to disrupt the deportation operation? I don't know. And that was obviously big lobbying, and there's a bigger issue in terms of just illegal labor that this country relies on that, I mean, Trump really should be calling out instead of giving a lot of these farms and these hotels breaks in terms of allowing the illegals to stay and work and undercut Americans. I do think that's a problem. Maybe I should lower the grade a little bit because of that. But I think securing the border, you've got no illegal immigration right now. That's a big thing. So when it comes to the immigration, I mean, you could maybe say A minus, the recent stuff. I think any type of amnesty work program right now, based on the mandate that we have, it shouldn't happen. Trump was lobbied heavily by big agriculture and a lot of the hotels, and it's unfortunate. But I mean, also part of it is you go to these construction sites, it's like all illegals. And so it's like, how much illegal labor does the United States rely on? That's a bigger issue. And it's not like, oh, we need to keep that illegal labor because otherwise our country can't exist. Well, no, that's not the answer. That is not the answer. The answer is we need to thrive without it. So that is the immigration spiel. Moving on to the next thing I want to do, I guess, is the economy. So economy inflation revolves heavily around the Trump tariffs. And Trump originally imposed the tariffs. It was 3 countries. It was Mexico, Canada, and China. And he was going to heavily attack China. With China, we got into a little bit of a trade war with them to where we hit them with 145% tariff. They responded with 125. The dynamic with China is we will always hold leverage over them because of our consumer base and just the amount of manufacturing infrastructure that they have. They need to be able to sell to us. And obviously we run a huge deficit with them. They have a big surplus, so they're very interested in doing a lot of trade with us. We still have a big tariff on them, even after all of this stuff, even after we brought it down. I believe we have around a 50% tariff on China. They have around a 10% tariff on us in return. It's either 30% or 50%. And then you look at the Liberation Day situation, Trump originally tariffing the countries, which he called, retaliatory tariffs. It really wasn't. It was based on deficits we have with countries, which you could say is not really a fair way to judge a country because we're obviously going to, run some pretty significant deficits with very small countries considering how rich we are as a country and how much money we have. But that's what it originally was. There were some problems with certain metrics, specifically the 10-year yield. That was the main one, why Trump decided to bring all of those down to that 10% global rate. So it was like a 10% tariff on pretty much every country we do trade with outside of Canada, Mexico, and China. They had all their own tariffs at different rates. And we still do have tariffs on China and Mexico, and we're still potentially working out deals with those 2 countries. And I know there's going to be a renegotiation of that North American trade agreement. That's supposed to happen next year. I don't know why they just don't do it this year. But the tariff formula, I believe right now, the idea is an equilibrium, meaning that Trump wants to be able to generate revenue in a way that will not be inflationary for U.S. consumers. So the idea is if you spread, and this is what we were doing, around 10% tariffs, now he's upped it to 25, 30% tariff. I think a lot of this is going to get negotiated by August 1st because that's the final deadline supposedly, is August 1st. Because the 90-day period was up, so he reimposed a lot of these tariffs at higher rates than the 10%. But I think the goal for Trump is to try and extract as much revenue for the U.S. government as possible without it coming back to the consumer. And the tricky thing with tariffs is a lot of the times there is a significant lag. It's not a one-for-one. Oh, if we hit a country with a tariff and there's not inflation the next week, that means we can keep the tariff on for indefinite and there's not going to be inflation, because there is a significant lag. A lot of it depends on when the imports came into the United States, the stockpile, things like that. The inflation numbers recently, you could say, is it concerning? Back up to 2.7%. I mean, it was expected. And I think the overall point with Trump is we have, the ammunition right now to say we are generating 300% more in tariff revenue every month with very little inflation increase. Now, you can say we don't know for sure just because there's many different scenarios that can play out in terms of if Trump keeps these tariffs on all of these countries, if he brings them back down by August 1st. But the idea is we're trying to extract as much, and really this is taking advantage of, to a degree, how attractive our consumer base. It's not taking advantage of our consumer base because liberals will say that. They'll say, well, you're just upping prices for American consumers. You have to understand how attractive our consumer base is to other countries. Some of the times the countries, if we slap a 30% tariff on Indonesia, I guess that's a bad example because we just worked out a trade deal with them. If we slap a 30% tariff on one of these smaller countries, they might lower their labor costs to produce things cheaper to try and undercut the tariffs to make themselves still attractive to U.S. companies to buy from, even with that 30% tariff, because of how impressive our consumer base is. So there's a number. It's not just ironclad. Oh, it's going to be inflationary. Everything goes up. And even if it was inflationary, it was a 10% global tariff. So if we're slapping a 10% tariff on a country, the idea that that's going to be crazy inflation, it's 10%. That's not a heavy tariff. Now, Trump has upped the tariffs on a lot of these countries, and we'll see what the reaction is to that. Certainly, that gives you more revenue generation, but you're also talking about an increase in terms. I mean, this is what economics is. There's a yin and a yang. There's a pro and a con. So this is why it's so easy and so hard to argue at the same time, because there's always something positive, but there's also going to be something negative. And listen, I think the tariffs have been good. Yes, we're going to have to see with the inflation, but also that's not even the number one goal of what tariffs are. It's to bring back domestic production and to be less reliant on the other countries, especially China. And by the way, China, you look at 2018 versus where we are now, they want less reliance on our consumer base. They want to trade with other countries as well. And it's also important when you look at the trans shipping tariffs, to where we have basically renegotiated with all the countries surrounding China. They could circumvent the tariffs originally by sending their goods to Taiwan or Thailand, and then those countries, well, they wouldn't send them to Taiwan, but to Thailand and other countries within the Pacific state, and then they would trade with us so they'd get around the tariff because they would send the goods to those countries. But now we've got the trans shipping tariff, to where if anything comes in from foreign, that's going to be hit with a 40% tariff. If things originate in a certain country and then they send it to us, that's good. But if you're getting shit from China and then you're sending it to us, that's another tariff on top of it. So we're aware in terms of the way China tries to skirt around it. And you've also got just another thing within the economy. You have the rare earth situation, which is very interesting in terms of Trump and the Greenland stuff, whether or not he'll be able to say that's another video. I mean, obviously that hasn't happened at all. That there's really no reason to discuss it right now. But the overall point is it proves that Trump really wants rare earth diversification. And so we've got the rare earth diversification to a degree with the deal with Ukraine. And now what we've got is rare earth mines opening. There's one that just opened in Wyoming. Hopefully we've got around $25 billion to invest into the refinement. Let me give you a little nugget on rare earths. I mean, rare earths are not necessarily that rare. Yes, we would like to get them from Greenland, from Ukraine, from other countries, but we have a lot of rare earths ourselves. This isn't something to where China is sitting on all the rare earths just because they got lucky in terms of the geographical location. The problem is they can refine the rare earths at a much better rate than we can. There's environmental problems. There's other issues that we have to square away. But what Trump is doing is he's investing $25 billion into the refinement of the rare earths. And so the idea is we refine rare earths domestically and there's less of a reliance on China. They were holding up the rare earths to the United States, rare earths that we need for the EVs, the electric vehicles, the car batteries, and iPhones, and also solar renewable is big with the EVs, and so we're trying to detach, and this is bipartisan, by the way. This is something that doesn't get talked about because it's agreed upon that this needs to happen. And so that's another big thing when it comes to just the economy. But listen, inflation, we'll see what happens. I mean, we're so early into the term. I mean, the trueflation is really low. The energy has cooperated with this administration like an amazing. You look at crude oil, how low it is. You look at some of the gas, and I mean, gas is basically at a 4 or 5 year low. I was just talking about in my previous video. So that's phenomenal. And listen, let's just hope that this continues. And that is kind of this current. I would get in terms of the grade. I mean, it's incomplete. We have to see how right now. I would say it's about an A minus. I would say because of the tariff revenue we're able to extract for such a small inflation increase, but there is a potential lag there. I understand it. It's an incomplete grade when it comes to the economy. It's an incomplete grade when it comes to all of this. But right now, a snapshot, I would say around an A minus. Just the fundamental idea of, and by the way, really what should have happened, and I don't want to say this, but we should have forced a recession. Now you can't do that if you're Trump because of the fact that you have midterms in 2 years. Just the way the U.S. Political system works, you don't have the time to do that. But we could use a housing reset. We could use a reset in terms of making sure the inflation is lower. Technically, we did have a reset in 2020. The problem is they messed it up when the Democrats got in. They didn't raise the interest rates fast enough. Now it's the opposite. They won't cut the interest rates. They want a 2.0% inflation rate, core inflation. The Fed does to cut. And that's kind of the issue with Powell right now. It's 2.7. It just went up by 0.3. So, I think Powell will cut possibly 2 times by the end of the year, but that's another issue in and of itself. But, the policy based on, and this is not even the biggest thing when it comes to the idea of these tariffs. It is onshoring domestic production, and we are doing that, especially in the auto industry, very bipartisan support, a lot of Rust Belt support, some Democratic senators support, the heavy 25% tariffs on steel and auto on Canada, and also Mexico, which is a really killer because you'll get auto parts that originate in Canada, go to Mexico, then go to the United States. It's like a double whammy. So, or they'll go to the United States, then go to Mexico, then go to Canada. It's very interesting. But we're bringing home a lot of auto jobs. I know that, and that'll be a big thing that Trump can use and boast about for the midterms, because there are some big races in Michigan, and so. I would say right now would be like an A minus. And listen, if I really wanted to be a homer to Trump, I would say an A plus because so far we're extracting an increase of around 300% in tariff revenue every month. It's gone from about 10 billion, which by the way, when we were getting 10 billion, that was thanks to the 2018 original Trump tariff that he had put on China, which originally liberals argued about, and then they kept it on, and we were able to generate even more money. But then, I mean, now he's gone just crazy with all these tariffs on all these countries, and we'll see if it ends up being inflationary. I mean, it's a wait and see a thing, and you're trying to find the equilibrium, so it's not inflationary. You're going to have, hopefully, to a degree, depending on what sector it is, the companies are going to eat some of it, and the reason is because it is a capitalist country. There is competition, and so if you do raise your prices, there is hopefully going to be somebody that undercuts you, and it forces you to keep prices down. Now, that doesn't work in everything because there are certain companies that have monopolies, but for hopefully most of it, that's how it's going to work. And then you're also going to get the countries that are shipping to the United States that are importing into the U.S. potentially lowering their costs to make the items to hopefully be more attractive, even though the U.S. companies are going to have to pay the tariffs, and then that's how we're able to generate the revenue. And then if you generate less revenue, well, technically it's a good thing because then you are onshoring domestic jobs and hopefully higher quality jobs. So you've also got that. You've also got really good jobs reports. We're seeing we're seeing less part-time jobs and more full-time jobs. It's less low quality jobs, more high quality jobs are coming into the market. I've seen that as well. We've got a lower inflation rate. That was another reason they said they didn't want to cut. So that would be my opinion. I'd say it's like an A minus. I mean, this is fundamentally a good situation for Trump, but we're 6 months. So it's like, well, the inflation is showing signs of creeping up. They're going to use that as a negative. We'll just have to see how it works out. Trump has all these tariffs deployed onto many of these smaller countries at 25-30%. He's got a big tariff of 50% on Brazil. Is that going to stay in on August? I mean, this is all stuff we're going to have to see, and we'll see what the administration decides to do in terms of their strategy. on whether or not they think this will be too inflationary. But even if it was inflationary, I mean, this is like ripping the Band-Aid off in a sense, to where you have to stop this over-reliance on the foreign trade. And they say, well, free trade. Well, it's not free trade. It's other countries undercut us all the time with cheaper labor laws so they can produce things cheaper. And that's just how it is with capitalism. The companies in the United States are they're gonna go and get their goods elsewhere and bring them to the United States, and that's why you have to give them an incentive, or you have to give them a reason to produce domestically. And so the hope is that they either do that, or they're gonna have to pay the tariff, and we're gonna generate revenue. And we've obviously got the crazy deficit, and Trump is trying to get the rates down. The rates where they are currently, you're looking at $1 trillion in interest alone. You bring the rates down by half, you're looking at possibly $500 billion, maybe even lower. I don't think they're going to bring them down by that much, though. But if you've got a $2 trillion deficit and $1 trillion is the interest rates, well, you could cut that potentially in half. And obviously, the big beautiful bill is a whole nother thing. That being passed, that would be part of the idea of the economy and the overall policy. A lot of the tax cuts were already guaranteed. I understand people could say, well, maybe giving tax cuts at this point when we're $2 trillion in terms of a deficit is a problem, but they were already, Trump was going to do that. So it's important people understand that. And it really just depends on the overall growth of the economy on whether or not they end up adding to the debt, because that's a big thing. They say, well, it's going to add $3.3 trillion. Well, they're getting that number from actually pre-2017 predictions. All Trump did was extend the existing the existing tax cuts. And I would say that the tax cuts on some of these bigger corporations, it is a bit of a problem, and it really shouldn't be happening. But this is what you get with Trump. There's positives, there's negatives. The tax cuts for the middle class are certainly great. And, they say it's the biggest tax cut in history. And then you've also got and I guess this ties into it, you have the Doge situation, which you could say is probably on its own something else. Doge, you look at it and you would say, well, you could look at it two different ways. Number one, with what it was hyped up to be, they said $2 trillion, then they said $1 trillion in savings, and they got maybe $100 billion. So is that an F? Do I grade that as an F? Do I grade it as incomplete? The problem is with just in terms of our expenditures, it's all entitlements. If you're not able to touch entitlements, you're not going to do much. Now, they got rid of USAID, which some people will say was a Democratic money laundering scheme. But even if you want to try and play ball with the Democrats and argue with them, well, USAID was supposedly for soft power. How are we utilizing soft power properly and promoting democracy in poor countries? Look at the way the Chinese utilize soft power, and then look at how we did. To me, it's a $20 billion money drain, but it is only $20 billion. And the perspective of that is, well, if we've got this crazy deficit into the trillions, we can say we're very happy about getting rid of USAID, but it is only $20 billion per year. And then, they were able to cut some other things. And look, to me, it's just like you're not able to touch entitlements. It's going to be very, very hard. And then Musk and Trump had their big breakup, and Musk is just a weirdo, bipolar. He's starting his own party now, apparently. This doesn't really fit in with a grade, but I would say for Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, just being fair, it'd be like a C minus, a D. It's not, it wasn't what we wanted. But you could say, well, they weren't able to touch any of the entitlements, so it's a problem. But also the military budget, they said they were going to look at that. They didn't come close to touching it. The defense spending went up by $150 billion, and I criticized that. And there's a lot of Republicans that liked that. It went to $1.01 trillion, our defense spending. And I said, well, listen, I thought the Golden Dome was a smart idea. It makes sense. How else are we going to be attacked? We've got two oceans. There's going to be no land invasion, so they're going to hit us with missiles. So why not have an elaborate defense system? But, it's going to be a lot of money if we're going to do that. It's a lot of ground to cover. It's not like the Iron Dome at all, just because of the amount of ground that would have to be covered and defended if we developed a Golden Dome type situation, or I should say system. But overall, to me, it's like an A minus with the economy, inflation stuff. You could argue maybe a B or whatever, but it's like, I think Trump's doing a good job with it. It just depends on how inflation reacts, and that's really the policy we're going to be looking at. We get these interest rate cuts. How about the crypto stuff? They're embracing it. Hopefully they set up an actual strategic reserve for Bitcoin. That would be a big thing, and that would be really, really good. So, and then moving on to the, the foreign, I got to wrap this video up. It's 25 minutes long. And then moving on to the foreign affairs, the foreign wars, you've got the three situations. You've got Israel, Palestine, you have Israel, Iran, you have Russia, Ukraine. Russia, Ukraine, there's a number of ways you can look at it. What I would say with Russia, Ukraine, is that Trump is kind of having the best of both worlds in the sense of, you could either say, if you're a Republican, we want to stay completely out of it, or you could support Ukraine to try and pressure Russia into a peace deal while being very coy and forcing Europe to pay for it. Trump's doing number two. So what originally it seemed like Trump was doing number one, he was only giving Ukraine defensive weaponry. And by the way, in mid-April or early May, we finally did do the minerals deal. So any amount of defensive weaponry we give Ukraine, we get it back in the mineral deposits within, it would be Western Ukraine, depending on what gets annexed. There's going to be land that gets annexed. It's just the reality with it. I mean, there's no way to get that land back. It's those 4 oblasts, and it's Crimea. Well, they've already annexed Crimea in 2014, but you're not getting that land back unless there's some type of crazy sanction that we would have to probably coordinate with China and India. Even then, I don't know. But then that would also tank crude oil. So I don't. Or you send in troops, which NATO is not going to do because they're not going to escalate it like that. So overall, this is what I would say. You can say, well, Trump promised, and it was hyperbolic. It was exaggeratory. He said we're going to end it on day one. Okay, well, it's not going to happen like that. We knew it, but it is a situation now to where Trump has these conversations with Putin. Putin then does a big drone strike against Kiev. So it's like Trump is very, very angry at a certain point, and now he's trying to have best of both worlds. We're not paying for any of this. If we send weapons directly to Ukraine, or we send them defensive Patriot missile systems, that's going to be repaid, hopefully. Now people can speculate on if this is true or not. Hopefully it will be repaid in the mineral deal. In the mineral deal with Ukraine, the mineral extraction within central and western Ukraine. They lost a lot of their minerals in the Donbass region, which is right now controlled under military control by Russia. Or what we did, and this was just announced, we are sending offensive weaponry to the NATO countries, and the European NATO countries are going to pay for them off of us. So it's like this soft deal we're doing. And so the idea is, well, we're not technically fully involved. Obviously, Russia's not going to view it that way, but the point is we're not allowing the European countries to freeload, which is one of the main criticisms Republicans had. I understand it could seem hypocritical. Why would we do basically the same exact thing that liberals were doing? Well, the point is we're trying to end the war, and at least we are not allowing the European countries to freeload off of us. They have to pay for it. That's the point. So in terms of that, I mean, listen, it's like Trump gets like a C, maybe a C, maybe I would say actually like a B+, because you're not paying for it, but it is a thing to where I do think there were a lot of Trump supporters that thought because of Trump's mystique and the art of the deal that this was going to be something to where Trump would be able to force Putin to end this, and obviously that has not happened. I will admit that. And so that's another thing to take into account. Now, when it comes to the other situations within the Middle East, really there hasn't been a ton. You had the stuff that Trump was saying about Gaza turning into a resort and stuff, and that just goes to the whole theory. He's in bed with Israel and stuff, and I think there's going to be a deal. For me, Israel, that's been a catastrophe at this point. Everyone in the United States, or I shouldn't say everyone, a lot of people have turned on Israel, their war in Gaza. And I think Israel is going to try and come out, and they're probably going to annex some territories in the West Bank, and Trump's going to agree to that. And then the strip's going to have to be developed, probably with an investment through those rich Gulf countries. It's like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. And they're going to invest into it. And maybe the United States will also invest into it. I don't know what it's going to become, maybe an economic zone. And then when you look at the Israel-Iran situation, that was a tough one. And look, right now you could say, well, it looks very good for Trump. It does. It looks very good for Trump because the thing is, it was a get-in, get-out operation. This is the problem. Like, I would grade the operation an A+. We didn't lose a single thing. There was no U.S. aircraft, military. There's nothing harmed in the situation because they sent 14 missiles back at us and they told us where they were going and we shot them all down, except for one which just went away from the base and it didn't need to be shot down. If that's all it is, it's amazing because we destroyed a lot of their centrifuges. Yeah, you're not going to get 100% of their enriched uranium, but it doesn't matter. There's many different steps in terms of making a nuclear bomb. So the fact that we were able to destroy their infrastructure, and it takes an enormous amount of infrastructure. Fordo was their palace. It was their nuclear fortress. It was well underground. And, I mean, it's been reported, and you can say, well, they didn't hit it that hard. I mean, this has been confirmed. A lot of their centrifuges are destroyed. I mean, if B-2 bombers go in the air ventilation shafts, it's going to do some serious damage. and also the conversion facilities as well, which is another part of making a nuclear weapon. If those are dead, I mean, this is the issue. The problem is the reaction and what's going to happen now, because Iran is obviously going to be irate. There's going to be no chance of a deal now that we struck them, and they're going to be more emboldened to try and build a nuclear weapon. The question is, when will it happen? And Israel, the thought is that they still want the regime change. I think Trump has to know, although I don't know, Trump's self-awareness with this Epstein stuff has been lacking, so it's tough. But Trump has to know that you're talking about a total catastrophe. If you try and go for regime change with the United States and Israel in Iran, there is no appetite in the United States for that. It all has to be de-escalation. We struck them. We got rid of at least a lot of their centrifuges in their number one nuclear facility. We have to go for de-escalation. The problem is Israel's going to come out. They're going to say they're emboldened. We have to go back in. What does Trump do then? That's the problem. So, it's really an incomplete situation at this point. We can say that, well, it's a win for Trump. And, it's a good thing we were able to get in and get out, because I didn't think that was going to happen. And you look at some of these people, and I guess Tucker Carlson was the mainstream one who was very against it. And he obviously was wrong, because what he thought was there was going to be a reaction from Iran that would be serious, and there was not. They did nothing. All right, we basically took down their number one, and maybe I'm over embellishing it depending on the status report you look at, but we significantly harmed their number one facility that was underground that took decades to build, or at least over a decade to build, and they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. And obviously there were a lot of people that thought they were going to do something and it would drag the United States into a war, and that's not what happened. Now, could they do something in the future? Well, that's the issue for Trump. It's these Middle Eastern affairs are just very negative because of the administration and what people think in terms of, Trump and just the cucking to Israel and all of that. It's a problem. And so that's why I think it's just, let's just let it calm down, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. So I would say that the mission itself would be around, an A minus, maybe an A, depending on, I don't know the total number of, what they destroyed. How much of Fordo was actually destroyed? Was it 80%? Was it 70%? Is it rendered useless for at least, a few years? There were some reports that said it only got set back a few months. So if that's true, it's hard to really grade the situation. But when it comes to the foreign policy, I guess I would just say, like a B minus. I got to quickly, let me just do the quick miscellaneous stuff and the Epstein stuff. The Epstein stuff, it's got to be an F. There's no other way. Now, the thing is they have declassified stuff. They declassified the JFK files. And if you remember, the only real stuff that Biden declassified was because the 9/11 families forced him to declassify that stuff back in 2022 on 9/11, and that was Saudi connections to 9/11. The Dems barely declassified anything under Biden. Trump's already declassified more just in the JFK stuff that came out. And look, when it comes to the Epstein, there's no doubt. With Bondi, it's terrible. I don't know what to say. She miscommunicated. She lied. She had something, and they told her not to release it. I'm not going to rehash it. We know the situation. It's going to take another 10 minutes. It's terrible. And it only makes Trump look guilty, and it only makes Trump look like he's covering for Israel. It's a very bad look for the administration. So there's nothing I can say about that. I will say they have released stuff, especially the JFK stuff. They're saying they're going to release the 9/11 stuff. I'm sure they're going to release something as it pertains to Epstein to try and cover, patch up the situation. Will it work? Will it not? Probably it's not going to work, because there's no trust now. There's no trust in Bondi, Bongino, or Patel, even for the MAGA base. And so no matter what they release, they're going to say you're holding other stuff back. And so that's the real problem with that. But either way, guys, that's just, I would say right now for Trump, I'm sure there's other stuff I'm forgetting. But this is a 30-minute long video. I would say right now, I'd say for Trump, it's about a B grade. It's about if you're grading a test, it's about an 84%. So it's like a solid B. It's not a B plus. It's not really a B minus either. It's just so much is incomplete. It's just like the inflation stuff, the tariff policy. We'll see if the tariff policy works. It depends, on if it's crazy inflation. If we get the rate cuts and there's very little inflation and we generate this money, it's unbelievable. And we're going to get more domestic job growth as well. And then all of the domestic or all of the foreign situations are probably not over. Russia, Ukraine is not over. Hopefully Israel, Iran is, but you have to wonder about that if the Israel-Iran situation is over, at least for Trump, that's amazing. That would be an amazing, but the thing is we don't think it's over. That's the problem. And we'll see what happens with that. And then there's going to be something, I would imagine, with Hamas and Israel situation. That'll probably be resolved, but I would say Trump right around a B, guys, honestly, for the first 6 months. And yeah, that's basically just my opinion in terms of it. But guys, make sure you like the video down below. Also, follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.